Welcome to the Culture is Healing podcast, brought to you by Checking In. At Checking In, we create customized wellness tools for First Nations communities, centering each nation's language, culture, and traditions to support healing and well-being for their people. To learn more about our work at Checking In, please visit our website at checkingin.co. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoy this episode. Aichka. Ichual, Antapa Hochholitsa, Nitstaminas, Halalt, Kowitson, Lyaxin. Hello, everyone. My traditional name is Hochholitsa. My English name is George Harris Jr., and I am calling today from my home here in Staminas. This is the community that my father is from. This is the community that my mother married into. And this is the community that my siblings and I were raised in. I belong to George Harris Sr. and my late mother, Sylvia Harris. And my grandparents from my father's side of my family are the late Lawrence and Irene Harris. My grandparents from my mother's side of my family are the late Bernard and Nora George. And my familial connections to Halalt come from my mother, Sylvia, and my grandmother, Nora. And my familial connections to Kowitson come from my grandfather, Bernard. Through both sides of my family, I have familial connections to Lyaxin. And the name Hokolitsa is a name that's been passed down from generation to generation throughout my family. And I have the honor and privilege of being able to carry that name along with my father, as well as a few other family members. And thank you all so much for taking the time to be here today. Once again, my name is Hokolitsa, and I am the host of the Culture is Healing podcast. And today I have the honor and privilege of sharing this space with my friend Katie. And I would love to open the floor to have Katie introduce herself to you all. Aichka.
Hitchka, George. Aitsquel, Asiam Nasia, Anthapa, Katie Marren Nisquish, Tanitsan at Kokwatlaquam, Quamloch at Treaty 1 territory, Treaty 6 territory, England, Ireland. Good day, respected friends. My name is Katie Marren. I live in Qualicum. I come from St. Boniface, Manitoba, Edmonton, Alberta, England, and Ireland. I'm a member of Métis Nation of BC, and I'm really grateful to be coming to you from the traditional territory of the Qualicum First Nation. Grateful to be a guest and a visitor here, to work here as district principal of Indigenous education for Qualicum School District. And every day I reflect on how grateful I am to have the opportunity to learn from knowledge holders from both Qualicum and Snoqualmie First Nation on this place and the best ways to support Indigenous learners in our district. So, Heichka, thank you for having me.
Aichka Siam. Yeah, thank you so much for taking that time to introduce yourself to our community, and I really look forward to sitting with you and sharing the experiences that you've had, and we always love to share a little bit about um, our name of our podcast being Culture is Healing. This culture is healing is more than just a saying for our people. It's something that means so much. That understanding of culture bringing healing to our people. And I think that's why our elders fought so hard to maintain what we have, our language and our culture, because they understood the power that it holds to bring healing back to our communities. And culture is healing is often heard and spoken of in our communities. And you've had some um, opportunities to witness that. And now I'd love to hear in your own experiences when I say like culture is healing. Like, what does that mean to you um, in your daily walk?
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about this. Um, in my role, in my work here, and my calling here in Qualcomm School District, I always think back to Honorable Justice Murray Sinclair sharing that education is what got us into this mess, and education is what will get us out, and how important it is to bring that um, into schools, um, particularly because that's primarily where so much of the damage was done in the education system. So I feel a great responsibility to support Indigenous worldviews and perspectives, particularly local culture in our schools, to support both Indigenous and non-Indigenous learners to feel like they belong. It's really important. And I think we're doing some things specifically in our district, but something I really wanted to share was the work that I think is exciting and forward moving structural change around the ministry and their Indigenous focused grad requirements. So in 2023, the ministry said to all schools in the province of BC, all districts, that in order for a learner to graduate out of our system, to be an educated citizen, they must take an Indigenous focused grad requirements worth 4 credits to learn about history, to learn about, with Indigenous worldviews and perspectives, to learn from Indigenous authors, with that focus, because without that, the ministry does not consider students in this province as being fully educated citizens. And that's a structural change, which is important because historically, this Indigenous worldviews and perspectives have been left out of our system purposefully. We're a Western built system, Eurocentric built system. And so it's important that all students, have this other perspective that's brought into their learning. And specifically for Indigenous learners, they haven't seen themselves in learning. It's important that they don't feel like they have to leave their identities at the door when they walk into classrooms, when they walk into schools, that they can bring their full selves, including their cultural practices, including their teachings. They can bring those in, and that's a valid way of learning. That is valid in our system. And, I that's something that we're working really closely with teachers on. How do we do this in the best way? And we can't do that without the support and the teachings from our local First Nations. In this case, our schools are on the shared territory of Qualicum First Nation and Snoutnamas. And we take their guidance on how to do this best, on how to teach children in the system, local knowledge, worldviews, perspectives, and teachings. And that's really, my work along with other principals and teachers to do that in the schools.
Haichka. Yeah, thank you for sharing. It's very powerful to be able to, like you're saying, not have to, take away our identity in the education system. And I know that is such a growing and evolving process, and the implementation of the history, I think is very huge. And thinking about the truth and reconciliation progress, it's so often people want to step over the truth part because it's so painful to be able to see and hear the stories of that have happened to our people, and when they're confronted with the truth, that feels very counterintuitive for a lot of people, for their um, that patriotism that people carry of being Canadian. We're portrayed worldwide as the kind, giving, loving people, but then when the truth comes forward about what happened to our Indigenous people, that is very counterintuitive to what our world image would be as a Canadian. And so it's everyone has that shame and that feeling, and it's and the government tried to do their best to try to downplay all of the things that happened, and there are still so many people in this world who are trying to deny all of the things that have happened to our people. And so I think for you know Murray was so right in his words that we need to continue to educate in order to continue to move forward in a good way. All of the people need to know and understand all of the things that have happened in the past so that we can continue to heal from these hardships. And our people utilize our language and our culture to bring healing to our communities and to our families and to our loved ones. And now we have opportunities to be able to share those teachings, those songs with our siaya, our friends. I think that's so powerful. And I thinking of even some of the context in my own life, being able to share, and some of the things that I don't think about that have been shared. Um, even one of my best friends, he's lives up in Campbell River, and so the only time him and I actually get to hang out is usually virtually. We're playing video games, and um, he's slowly been kind of picking up our language, because when we're playing, usually he's the only non-indigenous person in our little group, and so even those times where some of that language is being passed on, like Tela, because in game money to purchase things for our team is something that happens, and so I'll be asking all the people that I play with for Tela, and when I'm asking and he's seeing people dropping money in game, he's like, oh, okay, so that's what that means, like Tela. And then so he asked, he's like, Tela is money, right? I'm like, yeah. Oh, okay. And then even it's like some of the smaller things too. I'm like, when one of our teammates gets kind of farther away, and or if it's me who's farther away, and my bro would be calling me like Mewa, like that means come here, like we need to regroup again, and yet again, there's my buddy Mark is like, hey Mewa, that does that mean like get over here, or I'm like, well, kind of. I'm like, well, it just means like, come here. And so he's like, oh, okay. And so there's these small, subtle things that are taking place, and sharing of culture, and for me that feels good to have one of my like best friends who's observing and cares enough. Now if he's the one who is requesting the money, like, oh, hey, give me your Taylor. And it's just like cool to hear someone else like outside of our community like speaking some of those words, and it just like for me, I know it brings healing to me. So yeah, it's pretty cool.
Yeah. Lawrence Thomas from Stanawas, he shared something the other day um, that really stuck with me. We've been working a lot on language, the whole Kamitnam, and working on Puntlich language as well in our district. Thanks to the support and the teachings of Jesse Rakalma, he's our language teacher. And we've really been focusing on that. And he said, when our students, it's hard for us to walk through those doors. It's hard for us to send our children through those doors. When our children hear, oh, I native in the morning, as they walk down their hallways, they think, I matter. I matter. And I will never forget that. Um, how important it is. That seems small and subtle, but the message that sends to um, Indigenous learners, how important they are and how much, and that they belong, because historically the families have been told that they don't. And so that's our work. That's our work to do.
Mm.
And to have that guidance from yourself, from Samquat, from Jesse Rakalma, um, from members of the Indigenous Education Council that we have. This is another structural thing that was put in place by the ministry just late 2023 as well. Amendment to the School Act that every district across the province of BC has an Indigenous Education Council.
Mm.
And it's a representation from local First Nations and any other, depending on your student body, there's representation, but the most representation has to be from local First Nations. So in our case, we have members from Stanawas and Qualicum, and they are their own council. So they are not a council or committee of the board. They have their own legislative authority,
Mm.
and they advise the boards of education and our district on improving outcomes for Indigenous learners. They're their separate council. They make recommendations on targeted funds. So my budget, not recommendations. They advise how to spend that money for their children.
Mm.
Anything that can impact Indigenous learners, they advise us on. And we meet monthly, and they ask really hard questions of our district, as they should. And they have their own legislative authority to say, we need things to be done in this way. For example, we want, and right now they're in conversation around what they prioritize. Do they prioritize language? Do they prioritize academic success? What are their priorities? And then that's my job as the bridge, as district principal of Indigenous education, to support that in schools. But they tell us what their priorities are, and we make sure those happen. And that's the missing piece, is those voices have not been present at the tables,
Mm.
not been present at decision making tables in our education system. And it is mandated that they are there now. And so we're fairly new in that process, but how grateful am I to have that guidance? I'm a guest and a visitor here, and I take their guidance very seriously. And I wouldn't be able to support 580 Indigenous learners in our district without their guidance. So That relationship with local First Nations, in our case, Nanawas and Qualicum, is number one in the work. Um, the work wouldn't be able to take place without them. And I take that responsibility very seriously.
Hmm. HKSM. That's so powerful, and I think I was thinking of that saying, not about us without us, and the I love the approach that you and your colleagues are taking within regards to making sure that our Indigenous voices are being heard, and how to best service our Indigenous people, and like you were saying, like the education system is very colonial system, and it's not built for our people, and even reflecting on my own like learning journey. um I remember being in college in my first semester, and I was doing terrible, and I remember like calling I was calling out to my mom, and I was just like, oh, like literally like crying on the phone to her. I was like, I want to go home. Like, I'm doing terrible here. Like this isn't meant for me. And she she gave me teachings about understanding that in learning we sometimes we fail, but we have to get up and keep trying. And near the end of our conversation, she kind of shifted it, and she was like, okay, like you've had your time where you've fallen and you've made mistakes, and what are you going to do now? What are you going to do different? And she goes, well, if you're learning back home, like in our home, and I know she was talking about learning in our longhouse, and she goes, what would you do? How do you learn? I was like, all right. So like I took that thought process of the ways I've been learning my whole life and conceptualized that into finding success in the Western society. And I said, well, we're always taught, you be there, you sit down, you pay attention, you watch what's happening, you listen to what's happening, and then that's a large part of the process of our learning. And so I was like, well, shared that with her, and she goes, that's right. you know so what can you do to set yourself up now to learn better? And I said, well, I guess I can, you know I hated sitting near the front of the class. I was like one of those guys who always just sat at the back and was just kind of chill about it. And I was like, well, maybe I'll start sitting near the front of the class, and I'll start watching and listening more. And for me, that was what really like changed my learning process and ability, because being intentional with that time that I had with that teacher, being intentional of like listening to what they were saying, really like stuck with me and helped me in my own learning journey. And so that was, something that was such a game changer for me, which, it was a shame that I learned it so later in life. I wish I had that thought process implemented earlier, because that would have definitely would have improved my high school GPA for sure. But yeah, and it's really cool to think of how our 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 people can take that learnings that we have, and the process of learning that we have in our home, and bring it to the Western society's education system, and be able to implement it, and seeing how now that the Western education system is wanting to learn and know and understand and implement more of our traditional ways of being. It's powerful, and it's beautiful to see, because now our people are not just an afterthought. We're at the forefront of people's minds and people's hearts. And so thank you for the work that you're doing to ensure that we are not an afterthought. We are a part of the process. And my hands are raised to you, my friend, Ichka.
Yeah. Um, there's something called Professional Standard 9. And in 2018, it was brought forward with BCTC, and it requires all educators to incorporate Indigenous worldviews and perspectives into their teaching. All educators. It's a requirement. It's in all subjects, all grades in the curriculum. And so it's not just a suggestion, it's really important work. Now, where my work is and my team's work is really supporting people to do that in a good way. Most of the teachers in our system have been raised in the Western Eurocentric way and have not been exposed to some of this, some of the Indigenous worldviews and perspectives, and are afraid to do it. They don't want to get it wrong. So that's our job, to support that. And so the teachers in our district really said, like, we want to learn more from local First Nations and knowledge holders and elders from this place. And so both Jesse, Rakalma, and I sat down and we kind of created a timeline kind of events, like what actually are kids learning about the history from, Canadian history, history from this place. And they're not learning. You spoke about truth before. The old textbooks and things that are there, it doesn't include the truth. We know this. So Jesse and I, and with partnerships with Snow and Qualicum, sat down and said, what do kids need to learn? Like, what do they need to know?
Mm.
And we created a timeline that includes the doctrine of discovery. It starts with, doctrine of discovery and the Royal Proclamation Act and some of those things, the Indian Act. But then it also includes things that are more local, like the first point of contact on Vancouver Island, which was Nootka Sound, which is traditionally named Yuquat, but the story of Nootka Sound and how that was misnamed
Mm.
by European folks who landed. And the Bob and White case, Clifford White and David Bob from Stanawas and Snanemoch, they're hunting and fishing, the fishing, hunting and fishing rights case. That was one. And how important those things are, and they're from this place, and kids don't know. Or the
Mm.
story of Gilkamat, Craig Bay, the sacred burial site that in 1994, developers went in and dug up graves. Over 120 bodies were found, and this was a secret burial site. Down at Craig Bay, they wanted to develop a condo, and when elders asked them to stop, they didn't stop. This is a significant story in our community, and people don't know that story, and they need to know, and
Mhm.
students need to know. And so what we did was we carved out what is it that they need to know, but then rather than me tell or teach it, we thought, well, we should have people from this place teach and share their stories.
Mm.
That's learning from the heart and learning from people from here. So we have developed a film. I suppose it's a little bit of an interactive timeline, called As It Was Told to Me, As I Remember It, where we filmed elders and knowledge holders from Qualicum and Stanawas telling the story of the Horn Lake massacre, telling the story of Gilkamat, Craig Bay, talking about the Bob and White case, um, teaching about the Indian Act, folks from this place. And so this is being rolled out, and this is what teachers will be learning themselves because
Mm.
they haven't learned these things, but also when they learn them themselves are expected to um, teach them in their classrooms. And it's directly from the mouths of local First Nations. And so you can't get it wrong.
Mm.
This
Mm-hmm.
is this is their story. This is the truth, and this is what students need to learn. So we're just in the very end of we've already finished production, but creating it and bringing it into our Moodle so it becomes an online course. And teachers are excited to have this support to bring these teachings into their classroom. And I learned, sitting with knowledge holders and elders, I learned more about this place than I ever learned about myself, my own culture. Like, what a gift. But I'm learning about myself and where I'm from through teachings from people of this place.
Mm.
So it's both a personal journey and a professional journey, and being able to share that with educators in our district who then can also share with students in classrooms.
Mm.
Education's the key. It really is the key, and it's a place where we can do a lot of good work. And we need to get to the little ones when
Mm-hmm.
there's kindergartens who are walking in the door who are saying, I need to like what, and kids I'm
Mm.
finding are so much more reverent and open to these teachings than adults.
Mm.
I don't know why, but kids are never the problem. They soak up. They soak up these teachings so quickly and easily. Maybe they haven't been jaded yet. I don't know, but adults are the ones who struggle more so
Mm.
than kids. So let's, make sure we support kids in this learning because they want to take it up. It's
Mm.
exciting for them and it makes them feel whole as well. So
Mm. Mm. Hi, Chika. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. I always, love hearing that, and I love hearing the passion in your voice for the work you're doing, and being able to, ensure that our people's stories are not just being heard, but they're being heard correctly. And I love that. And Haichka for that work, and thank you for representing, you know and representing well in this world, and appreciate your the heart that you carry with you for this work. So Haichka. And as we're kind of, taking a deeper dive and deeper look into, our work and, culture bringing healing, obviously there are so many amazing opportunities to, um, see and witness the work that takes place. And I was going to ask you if there, in your time and your work had been any cultural activities or ceremonies that you've had the opportunity to partake in or witness that really hold a special place in your heart.
yeah, one thing that comes to mind that every year is so powerful for me, and I know for my staff, is the Indigenous grad ceremony that takes place, the blanketing ceremony that takes place in June. And all Indigenous families and students are invited to the event. So we honor every school, grades K to 11. We call them up on stage and we say, congratulations on completing another year. And then when the grade 12s come up, local First Nations, so Qualicum and Stanawas, host a blanketing ceremony for them. And it's it's powerful in so many ways. I think um, the blanketing ceremony, really the unique and kind of powerful element is the element of care. So of the wrapping in the blankets, of how much they are cared for and honored and uplifted for their work. And when you see regular graduation ceremonies, those personal things aren't in the ceremonies. It's just not the same. It's not as sacred. So, to me, to watch students, and many of the graduating students are not from this place. Some are, some aren't. Some are, off reserve. Some are Métis students. Some are Inuit students. But for them to participate in a traditional local ceremony is
Mm.
very important to them. It is such a gift. And for the families and all the Indigenous students from grade K to 11 to watch that take place is incredibly powerful. And what I also find that, in our system, in most of our ceremonies, whether it's graduation ceremonies or grade 7 or any events, it's a very, like I talked about before, Western Eurocentric way of doing business. And when we get to the year end blanketing ceremony, there are folks, principals and vice principals, superintendent, associate superintendent, who come, and they don't own the floor there.
Mm.
We're in a hierarchical system where they're used to being at the top and running the
Mm.
show. And this is a beautiful way for them to actually be learners and to
Mm.
recognize that. So it moves kind of from triangle to circle where, you
Mm-hmm.
know, we're all learners in this. And they have learning to do as well. What a gift for them to, you know, um, be placed in a different position in that way. That's a real gift. So yeah, it's really surrounded, this blanketing ceremony has surrounded, I would say, our Indigenous learners with love, with their extended families as well. And 3 years ago when I first came, there were only 10 graduates from both of the high schools that came. This year we had well over 30 graduates who.
Mm.
So we have to pick another venue. We just keep getting more and more and more
Mm.
folks because that's how powerful it is to sit back and watch. And I think that people really understand the reverence and the sacredness of the blanketing ceremony. Yeah, so it's a powerful thing for me to experience and be a part of every year.
Mm. Oh, that's beautiful. Yeah, and I know, it just the growth that I've been able to witness even since my high school days has been remarkable. I know, um, the supports that our people have in like the Western school system have slowly been building up. And I know when I was in school, there was um, an Aboriginal education room where our people could go to learn, um, in a safe space, because that's not always something that is granted or given to our people. And so we had that had just been implemented in my early, like, high school years. Um, and the school district had started, like, the process of implementing what you're speaking of, like a dedicated, like, district wide, like, Aboriginal grad, that was separate from the main grad, so that we had the opportunity to celebrate and honor our Indigenous youth, as they, achieved this goal that was set out in front of them by Western society. And, I thought it was amazing that we had the opportunity to do that, to celebrate together. And then when I got into like our regular, like just our school based grad, it was so different.
I
Oh, it
think
was.
even I was just thinking, even the visual of, and it's not one's right or wrong, but in one case they're in a robe, they have a diploma and a cap. Okay, so that's one, that's one, and that's not wrong. I'm not saying that's wrong, but there also could be another way.
Mm-hmm,
There is another way where wrapped in a blanket with a headband with
mm-hmm,
keychains. Like, how beautiful is that?
mm-hmm,
So, I'm not saying only do one or the other, but I'm saying there can be other ways of honoring, and let's continue to bring this in.
mm-hmm. Yeah, most definitely. And like even so, I remember when my um, two middle sisters graduated, my mom had made them. Um, I don't know if it's a sash or whatever you might call it, but like a ribbon that
Shawl
was shawl kind of, but it was still in the same, and because everyone had shawls in their
for
grad gowns and stuff like
the
that, and
robe, the whatever that's called that goes over
yeah,
the robe. Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
and
Yeah.
so my mom had, so the school had issued one for everyone to wear, and my mom had it set in her heart that she wanted to have indigenous design on. So my mom was a seamstress, and so she made my sisters their own, but then she had indigenous design made on it, and there was like one teacher there, and he was still there when I was there, and he was very racist and did not like our people at all, and he called out my sister and was like, "Oh, that's not the school um, wardrobe, and you shouldn't be wearing that." And he was so against it, and got the principal involved, and the principal was like, "No, she's fine. It's she's representing her family," and he was all good about it. And then when I came around, which was quite a number of years after my sisters graduated, I um I don't know, I just wanted to do something different. And so my mom had a cedar grad cap made for me, and that same teacher, um, was yet again against me having and wearing that cedar grad cap, even to the point where he was like, called me stupid. He was like, "Oh, this isn't in line with our school, and I don't know if you know how stupid you look, and it's stupid that you would want to try to be different." And I was just like, "But you know, I am. I'm different. Like I'm indigenous, and then I'm a little bit more of a um think pretty quick on my feet too. So I had to come back, and I looked at him like, "Was that a cotton shirt?" I'm like, because he was like, his one of his comments was like, "Oh, you're wearing that stupid plant on your head. You look stupid." And I was like, "Are you wearing a cotton shirt?" I'm like, "That plant shirt you're wearing looks stupid." And then I just like walked away, and I just kind of chuckled to myself, and I was kind of laughing and just kind of shook my head a little bit, and it was just like, "Oh my gosh, like I can't believe this is happening again." So, yeah, and then now looking forward to like, setting aside all of that horrific things that, and taking into context, what I went through was not good, but in comparisons to things that my father went through, I would consider myself lucky
Right.
compared to the things that my father went through.
Yeah.
And so for like looking at the big picture, there has been some good progress that has happened. Is it perfect? I would say no, but is it better? I would say yes. And even thinking of the context of the foundation of what we're talking about being culture, bringing healing. My father, we were at the most recent grad I went to was my niece Annika, and we were down in Cowichan in the Cowichan School District there in '79, and it was awesome because in the Indigenous grad was down in Cow Bay, which is one of the traditional territories of our Cowichan people. Very significant, powerful place, and we got to watch and witness the ceremony, and then also when we got to the whole school grad, our people were at the forefront of the grad ceremony. There was a land acknowledgement, which yet again, like I think back to my time when I graduated, there was none. And there was a welcoming from a student came up and spoke Hulkaminam to the group, which yet again, thinking back to even when I graded, there was none. And now, even before the grads entered the building, they were the path for them was cleared by the Tsinghua dancers. They sang, they danced, they performed like 5 songs in there, 4 songs I think, and then the grads came in, and not only was it just powerful for all of that to take place, but seeing some of the regalia that our students from our Cowichan nation had the opportunity to wear. Not only did they have, cedar headbands or cedar grad caps. I remember seeing a young lady wore a paddle jacket, and there was quite a bit of like amazing, family owned artwork that's being displayed on. I remember seeing a young man who had a um, native design like vest that he was wearing, and I was just like, man, like this is cool. Like the progress that's taken place is definitely really amazing to see in all of these ceremonies, and even in the Western ceremonies that our people are still being welcomed in. So yeah, and yeah, I remember hearing my dad too, when he was watching. He was like, "Wow," he's like, "This is neat," and for to hear him talking about it was amazing. So a lot of progress being made for sure. Yeah, yeah, and we're thinking about some of those education processes that are happening for our young people, and undoubtedly you've had a lot of opportunity to hear a lot of amazing people share a lot of amazing teachings. I was going to ask you if there had been any teachings that have been shared with you that really help you um, in your work or in your daily life. I'd love to hear any one of those teachings that have been passed on to you.
Yeah, I was saying to you earlier that it's so hard for me to even pick because, I've been blessed with um, so many teachings and this Noaeth that's been shared with me by people of this place. Coast Salish teachings. There's so many, but a couple stand out that I think back to often. In my first month of working here in Qualicum School District, I met with Chief Michael Rikama of Qualicum First Nation, and I said to him, Chief, you know, what what do we need to do? What share with me, what is your dream for our district? What work do you need me to do in our district to make sure that that happens? What are some of your dreams for this place for students in our district? And he shared with me that he would like to see more circles being used in multiple ways in classrooms in our schools. And the reason for that, of course, is our system, like I talked about earlier, is very triangle based. So, and this is the Western way, where there's somebody standing at the front of the classroom delivering knowledge to passive students who don't know anything, that we're just like, imposing on children all of our knowledge. And we know that that's not necessarily true. I mean, there's some things that adults know that kids maybe don't, but there is a collective knowing of all students and adults together in the classroom. So switching from triangle to circle, where everybody in that space has a voice, is important, is heard. The sitting in circle removes barriers to connection, building community, working together in a positive way. So there's multiple ways of bringing circle into classrooms. You could do it in a restorative way. If historically people have sat together in circle, villages would come together and sit in circle to resolve conflicts or problems. And can we bring that circle pedagogy into our classrooms? And that was his ask of me. And so we have most definitely done that. We've been doing some teaching around circles with principals and vice principals. We've trained all of my staff on circle and how to lead circle. And we have also done lots of teaching with classroom teachers, how to incorporate circle into your classroom. And so many of them are accessing that now. It's moving from adult at the front with all the knowledge, imparting wisdom to children, sitting in rows, right? To even the shape of the circle really leads to that feeling of belonging, and my voice is important here, and I belong here.
Mm.
And so that's something that really that was his first guidance to me, and I take that very seriously. And we've been working on that in schools, and there has been a shift that teachers have shared with me on how students are learning to resolve conflicts,
Mm-hmm.
how students are learning to. You spoke about listening deeply, right? Your teachings from the Longhouse, what it means to listen.
Mm.
Sometimes adults really don't do a good job of deep listening, but we need to listen to children. Children have gifts. Children have things to teach us. And that's not a typical Western way that we've been taught. So bringing some of those teachings that come with circle into our schools and classrooms is really important. And then the other one that I refer to often is Stella Johnny Seymour from Cowitson. So she works with us in our district
Mm-hmm.
as elder. And I have to do a lot of sharing with principals, vice principals, with teachers, a lot of public speaking. And I know you and I spoke about this at the beginning of the podcast, that can be difficult, that can be hard. And in our way that we've been trained in, the Western way of education, is we have to be right. We're in charge. We know all of the things, and trying to get out of that perfection idea in my head. And her teaching was, take a deep breath,
Mm.
speak from your heart. You don't need to know all the right answers. When you get in front of people, if you speak from your heart, what your ancestors, what Creator needs you to share will be shared. And so I even thought about that before today on our podcast. Speak from your heart. You don't have to have all the answers. What needs to be shared will be shared with those you're teaching at that time. It will be shared if you lean into your heart. So
Mm. Achka. Yeah, I love hearing that, and being able to, you know, be able to listen and to speak from the heart is so powerful. And I think even just like the learning process and how as us as adults have to take that time to listen to the wisdom of our young ones. It's so powerful too. And even thinking of um some of that hierarchy you talk about is so interesting. I remember at my previous job, um I was asked why I didn't have my diploma like hanging on the wall. And I just kind of I chuckled and I was like, well, you know, I want to be able to honor, both worlds that I exist in. And I shared, with my manager, and I said, well, it's not that I don't like want to honor that part of me, but I feel if I'm hanging that on the wall, and this is my own personal views, and I feel like I'm honoring that part of me more than my indigeneity. I don't have a degree. I don't have a piece of paper that from my culture that says I've accomplished all of these things. All I have in me is what exists in my heart and in my mind, and that I have the opportunity to share. And so I said, so I choose to honor both sides of me by not having one above the other. And that was he was a little taken back by that because you know it was more of a Western view that he carried with him. So yeah, it was an interesting conversation, and even thinking about yesterday, I did some work with our culturally committed group, and we were talking about some of those teachings and opportunities for learning and what that might look like. And I shared that same story I shared with you earlier about my own thought process of how I can succeed in the Western world and implementing my cultural ways and sitting at the front and doing all of these things. And then my sister Kalila was sharing her own stories about her learning journey and her fears, and being able to speak clearly and be able to read from a cue card and all of these types of anxieties that come up for a lot of people. Um and then that sparked another like thought process of um I thought of the Hollywood right away, Hollywood movies, and thinking of like The Blind Side, that movie with like Sandra Bullock and the football player and all that. And there was that one teacher who like believed in this young man, and she was like, he is not dumb. He's not dumb. You might think he's not listening to you, but he is. And so she started like testing him, like, okay, let's talk about this war and what happened. And then so he's like, oh, is this the one that? And then he like verbally talked about it and was able to recite all of the things that was being taught by that teacher. And that got me thinking, even just in our conversation here, like Um, I know for me, like my verbal skills are a lot higher than my written skills. Like I'm a way I can think out and speak out loud better than I can than type out words. And I think for a lot of our and I'll speak for myself, I think for a lot of that really like ties back to our own traditions and our own ways of being, where originally had been um, sharing our teachings orally. The written word is so new to our people, and even still foreign to many. There are some who have adapted way better than others, but still, it's still so new. I think those are some of the opportunities that we can take a look at and learn from in both sides of our walk as an educator or as a learner, to take that time to see what works best for you. And if you're on the educator side, what works best for the people you're working with. Taking that time to really meet people where they're at is so important, because some people may have different gifts than others. And I would hope that we can really uplift those people and the gifts that they carry. So those are kind of the thoughts that I had as we carried on in our conversation. And oh, Aichka. And as we're looking into our journey, we've had the opportunity to share stories and share teachings that have been passed on to us. I was going to ask you if you had any um, teachings or any words of advice that you would love to share um, with our listeners here today.
Mm. Haichka, thank you for asking. Um, I feel really honored to share or to have the opportunity to share. Um, I was listening to a speaker um, a couple of weeks ago. His name is Dr. Dustin Louie. He's the director of NITEP, the Indigenous Teacher Education Program at UBC. And what he shared really stuck with me, and I've challenged myself and my staff to think about this. And he said that decolonizing and reconciliation is never ending work. There is so much work. And he challenged us, and I've challenged my staff to think about the place where we have the most leverage, the most amount of leverage to lean in. There's room for everybody with all these different skills and gifts in decolonization and reconciliation, that we don't want to get stuck in, you're not doing it right. Oh, you're doing it in this way. That's not the right way. That there's plenty of work for all of us. And can we articulate um, where we have the most amount of leverage, where we need to lean in to do the work? Because it wouldn't make sense for me, and I wouldn't have very much leverage if I was to decide to, talk about healthcare and reconciliation. I have no business there. So that's not a place that I would go. But I've been reflecting on what my leverage is and what my learning is and where I really can do this work. And mine is all around relationships. So I'm really learning, I'm still learning to articulate what that is. And relationships with children and their families, particularly children and families from the local First Nations, from this place, and really listening deeply. So I gave the example of Chief Michael Ricalma sharing with me, really listening and taking up what they've asked of me, and listening to what they need, making myself available, really building that trust, because trust, as we know, has been broken between Indigenous families and schools. We know this, right? Some Lawrence shared with us that they're afraid to come to
Mm.
school and are nervous of sending their children there. So I really lean into building that trust up if I can, and because it's been broken, and rightly so, rightly so. So how do I really? So I spend and I focus the majority amount of my time on building those relationships because I know how important families are to the children in our schools. So the relationship isn't just with the child who goes to the school, but it's with the
Mm-hmm.
whole family, and letting them guide my work. And what does your family need, and what kind of wisdom can you share with us that we need to change about how we do business? and and that's kind of how I'm beginning to articulate my work in reconciliation and decolonizing the system, is by listening deeply to children, families, community members from local First Nations on how to move forward in education to rebuild trust, to make structural change to our system that has done so much damage, to celebrate wins as we move forward, to share teachings in the right and appropriate way. And that's what I would challenge, or I would ask any listeners to think about. Where do you really, where's your leverage in reconciliation and decolonization? And go there and spend your time there and lift up others who are using their leverage in their own ways.
Mm-hmm.
Don't tell them they're doing it wrong. They're not, it's not a competition. There's lots of work out there for all of us. So how do we lift each other up and celebrate all of the different ways that we are supporting reconciliation across our province, across our nation?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for letting me share.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. I really appreciate you taking the time to come and sit and sharing with me today. And thank you so much for all of the amazing teachings that and stories that you're able to share. And thank you for sharing your words of wisdom with our listeners here today. And I just want to thank our listeners for coming in and listening to mine and Katie's amazing conversation here today. And I hope to catch you all in the next one. Take care, everybody. Aichka. Ewer.